Today, when a game launches on multiple consoles, it's usually the exact same experience. But back in the 80s and 90s, things were weird. The same game could have different graphics, different music, different difficulty. Sometimes even completely different mechanics depending on what console you owned. And honestly, some versions barely felt the same at all. When Doom launched on PC in 1993, it completely changed gaming. The speed, the violence, the atmosphere. Nothing else really felt like it. And almost immediately, everyone wanted on consoles. The problem was, most of those consoles had absolutely no business trying to run Doom. The SNES version of Doom almost feels impossible. Nintendo somehow got a full first-person shooter running on hardware that really shouldn't have been capable of it. To make it work, the cartridge included something called the Super FX chip, basically extra hardware built directly into the game itself. Even then, there were compromises everywhere. The screen window was smaller. Enemy counts was reduced. The frame rate struggled constantly. But honestly, the fact this version exists at all is kind of incredible. The PlayStation version took a completely different approach. Technically, it still couldn't match the PC version. But instead of trying to copy the speed exactly, it leaned harder into atmosphere. The lighting became darker. The soundtrack became much more ambient and unsettling. And somehow, the slower pacing actually made the game feel creepier. It almost turns Doom into survival horror at times. And this is something you saw constantly during this era. Different hardware meant different compromises. Different studios handled different parts. Engines weren't standardized. And cartridge space limitations forced developers to make major cuts. So instead of getting identical games, players often ended up with completely different experiences. If there's one game that perfectly represents 90s gaming controversy, it's Mortal Kombat. The violence caused massive backlash at the time. Parents hated it. Politicians talked about it. And naturally, every console manufacturer handled that controversy differently. Nintendo wanted Mortal Kombat on the SNES, but not that Mortal Kombat. Blood was removed completely. Fatalities were toned down. And in one of the weirdest censorship choices ever, characters started sweating grey liquid instead. Meanwhile, Sega leaned directly into the controversy. And thanks to one famous cheat code, the Genesis version became the versions kids actually wanted. ABACABB became playground mythology in the 90s. Enter the code, and suddenly the blood and fatalities were fully restored. Which, of course, made the Genesis version feel way more rebellious at the time. And then there's the Game Boy version, which honestly just looks painful. Missing animation, barely recognizable characters. It's one of those ports that really reminds you how ambitious handheld gaming used to be. Dynamite Headdy is probably the deepest cut in this video. It was developed by Treasure, one of the most respected cult developers of the 16-bit era. And like a lot of Treasure games, it's completely weird in the best possible way. The Japanese version is noticeably more relaxed. There's more dialogue, more story, easier access to transformations. And overall, the pacing feels much smoother. But once the game came overseas, things changed quite a bit. The difficulty was increased, story scenes were removed, and the overall pacing became much harsher, which was actually pretty common during 90s localizations. Publishers generally believed Western players preferred harder games. Looking back, this entire era of gaming feels kind of surreal. Today we expect games to be identical across every platform. But in the 80s and 90s, your console choice could completely change the experience. Sometimes for the better, and sometimes for the worse. And sometimes into something barely recognizable. The weirdest version here might honestly be Mortal Kombat on Game Boy. But the most technically impressive? That probably has to go to SNES Doom. It runs terribly, but the fact it runs at all is honestly kind of amazing. And the weird thing is, these weren't even rare. There are tons of retro games where different consoles got completely different versions. Alien 3, Shadowgate, Gremlins 2, even more bizarre Doom ports. So if you want another episode, there's definitely more to explore.